All right, episode 51 of the Indie Creator Exchange. Long overdue interview with Jeff Lafferty. Um, Jake's a little bit outside on this one, and I want to apologize to him up front because I am a huge fan, boy, for Jeff Lafferty and his work and everything that he's been doing, especially for his podcast or his vlog, as it used to be called way back in the day on YouTube. When I was migrating out of the real world employment, I searched and scoured for some support somewhere out there and saw this graying bearded man talking about his journey in comics and really became very connected to that as a process, and also to help me kind of, get back in, like the things that he experienced, positive and negative. And so I cannot thank you enough, Jeff, for starting your channel, and actually now you're back. So thank you for spending some time with Jake and I.
I appreciate that you watch.
Sunday.
I mean, that's really cool that you guys actually found it and watched and got something out of it, But I'm happy to be here, so thanks for asking me.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thanks for sending me
You're
a
welcome.
copy too. I got my copy too, so I'm just catching up. The way we like to start these out is going back to the beginning. So when you're little Jeff and you're walking around, um, what was the first thing that opened your eyes to the world of comics? You can talk about that first comic that you got, or toys, or whatever. Maybe it had something to do with the area that you grew up in. But give us the origin.
Okay, yeah, like how I kind of ever found comics. My dad would take me to the gas station, and I guess he read comics as a kid. He's not really into comics or that kind of stuff, but he kind of pointed me towards the spinner racks back in the day, and would tell me I could go get like 4 comics for $1, and so that was kind of like what started it all, I guess. And like back then it was like the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, that kind of stuff, and I just immediately liked them, and I think I had an interest in drawing like already. I'm not quite sure like where that came from. Like not many people in my family drew, but I remember my mom showing me things like how to draw like a gorilla face or something like that, And when I saw the comics, I was like, they're drawn, so you could have this like little adventure, like I could draw comics and then have this adventure inside the comics. I think it's kind of like how kids have adventures now inside games, And so that I was immediately attracted to them and just loved comics, and
Yeah,
just read them,
I think you're the fourth person in a row. Oh, we're getting a kind of a delay. I think you're the fourth. Last 4 weeks in a row. That's been kind of the story for all of our interviews. It's been like some convenience store or some department store, and the spinner rack, and mom let me go, grab a couple. I don't know what the prices were. I started with 20-cent Marvels, but you mentioned Avengers and Fantastic Four. That's kind of what I was into. I was into like Marvel Team Up and Defenders and Spidey and stuff.
oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, we're all from. I guess we're all from that era. And then take us now into school. So did you get any actual training, or were you just kind of self-taught? And what happened between like middle school, high school, all the way up to adulthood?
Yeah, I didn't I didn't man, I'm sorry. I wonder if I should have had headphones, but okay. I am not used to like talking and then hearing myself come back. But anyway, I went to high school, and I had a pretty good art teacher like towards the end of high school. Like in the beginning I couldn't get into art classes and all that happened. But then eventually towards the end of high school there was a teacher there that took interest in me, could see I could draw. And I could draw because of like comics, I would copy the comics, and just learned how to draw from that. and probably not even so much like the spinner rack comics, but what really caught my interest was like when I was in high school, all of the magazines started showing up, like Savage Sword of Conan and Epic Illustrated and Eerie and Creepy and all that stuff. It was like great. And those were the ones that I really just keyed off on, like those kind of artists and like that black and white inked work. And I learned how to draw from those. And then, my high school teacher kind of saw that I could draw. And then she introduced me to like painting and stuff. And so she actually got me some oils and was like, told me I could, oil paint. And she showed me how to do it and got me painting, and then dragged my dad in when I was about ready to graduate. And she's like, this kid's got to go to like art school, which I like thank her to this day for that, because my dad was, he wasn't doing any of that stuff, but she browbeat him into like, taking out a parent loan and getting me student loans and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up in an art college, but it was like a graphic design art college. So it really wasn't, probably the place I should have went, but I had no idea, you don't know anything when you're younger. You just kind of go where you go,
So where are we talking here? Are you in a big city, small town, suburbs?
Back then I lived in a very, very small town in eastern Colorado called Erie, Colorado. And it was like Nowheresville. And I ended up going to a college in Denver, which was still pretty small back then. And it was called the Colorado Institute of Art is what it was called. And but in some ways it was kind of fortuitous, because while I was there, like the comics, remember like when they were in the gas stations, first the spinner racks kind of went away. And then the comics on the magazine racks eventually started to kind of die off too. And so there was, maybe you'd see like a Savage Sword of Conan, but I really didn't see any comics like towards, high school and into college. And I had kind of thought that the whole comics industry had just like died, and just sort of went away and was like in the past.
Wow.
And I was still drawing and stuff, but I just didn't know that anything was happening, And so one day I was at school and I walk in and we're doing this kind of project where we had to bring stuff, in as reference and all this crap. So this guy had this big stack of comics, So I went over and I'm like, oh yeah, man, I used to read comics. I loved comics, all this stuff. And he's like, well, I still read comics, I'm like, how? You know what I mean? Comics anymore? He's like, yeah, I buy them. And I'm like, well, where? And he's like, I buy them at a comic shop. And then we just like, what are you talking about? A comic shop?
Boy!
And so he told me where it was. There was this comic shop in this town called Boulder, which is not that far from Erie. It's about 30 miles. And I went home and I asked my dad, because I was still living at home, it's like the first year in college. And I'm like, where's Boulder at, And he's like, remember this one town we went to this movie like a long time ago? He was like, that was Boulder. So I go up there and, I go to the first gas station when I get to town and look in the phone book, because there's no phones, there's no research you can do. And I look up the bookstores and there's a comic shop in there called the Time Warp. And I get the address and I drive there and, it's just like a house that somebody made into like a store. And, it's just like cracking that door, man. It's, I've heard other people say the same thing, but
Smell.
it's just like,
the smell of paper.
Right. Well, a newsprint and just everything that you ever looked for as a kid. Every freaking like ad you saw on the back of comics, all that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, it's just like right there. Yeah. And there were new comics on the wall, and I was like, "Oh my god, there's like fucking new comics," And it was just like, I don't know if it was that day or like a couple days later, but after that, I was like, I'm being a comic book artist. That was always my plan as a kid, was to be a comic book artist. And then when I saw that there actually was an industry and it was still alive, and I was just back on the train, man. Wow. But the first thing I always remember, the first thing I went in and you look at everything, and then I started to kind of hunt around for the stuff I'd always wanted to find, which was like the old Conans, like the old Conan magazine, because you get them off the newsstand, but you couldn't get the old ones, Right. So I like hunted around. I found this like banged up box, and they had a whole bunch of them in there, and I got like 20 of them. I took it up there, and I was like, oh my God, what is this going to be, like $7,000 or something? And it was like $20. Nobody
Yup.
Nobody wanted them, you know.
Oh man.
But I did. I took
Oh
them home,
my
and they were
God.
gold, man.
Those are the days. Yeah, well,
Yes.
they're probably like 25 a piece now if they're in decent shape.
Oh yeah.
I think one of the biggest comic retailers in the country is in Denver. Is that where Mile High is,
Oh
Kurt?
yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Mile,
Yep.
yeah, Mile High Comics. And the one in Boulder, the shop in Boulder, was actually a like an offshoot of Mile High Comics. That I guess I don't even know the exact kind of past history between like the owner Wayne and I think his name's Chuck Rosansky or something that owns Mile High, but they broke up and got into some feud, and there's always
Yeah.
been this big feud between them. Like I think even still to this day. So I always like thought Chuck Rosansky was a chump. I didn't
I
really
think
know
the
him.
Wayne. I have a Wayne story. I'm pretty sure that was the guy. In New York City, there was a store on West Broadway called Soho Zat, and I signed up to be a high school intern there because I was attending an alternative school called City as School. That's where Jean-Michel Basquiat went, among others. And you could do these internships a couple of days a week, and I was like, a comic store? Are you kidding? So I signed up, and yeah, the Mile High guy and Wayne, I think he was like kind of short and like balding with a beard. And he brought like boxes and boxes of comics. It must have been some partnership deal. So I get there and I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to start reading comics, looking at them, learning how to price them and sell them and bag them and everything. And they were like, oh no, you're just basically going to be like a security guard. And they're like, if anybody walks in, you just follow them around. And I was like, what? I was like, can I read the comics on my lunch hour? Like, that's the whole reason I signed up for that. No, it was so bogus. And, I ended up like, just buying comics, if I had any money. But that was such a disappointment. Wow. And yeah, it was the Mile High guy there. So,
Was it
so
really? Wow.
yeah, I know. All right, so now take us to your first. I imagine that you started like some sandbox works, some like semi-pro or amateur works before you put out your first comic. So what was your pathway to your first published work?
Um, yeah, like I guess if you start there, I set my path on trying to learn comics, which is a hard path. And, I just kind of practiced for a couple years and really didn't show my stuff to many people. And then I went to the comic shop because I really had no idea how the hell you get into this thing. And I went to the comic shop one day and there was that little postcard for a comic book convention. And so I'm like, okay, and Sam Kieth is going to be there, and then a couple other artists. But I remember, Sam Keith's like the main one. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to take my art down there and I'm going to show it to like, Sam Keith. He was like doing Wolverine at the time and, was getting kind of famous. Sam Keith's from like the Max and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I went down to this con and I took along my pages and I had no idea, what size to draw or anything. And I had like Will Eisner's book of, how to draw comics. And on the back of that book, they have a picture of Will Eisner at the desk and he has like a big old sheet of paper, So everything I drew was like 18 by 24 and stuff.
Oh boy.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I stand in line and I get up to like, Sam and I show him my work. And it's kind of funny because like I've showed my work to a lot of people, a lot of editors, all that kind of stuff. And like Sam was so nice and so gracious, and he looked at my stuff and he liked it, and he said, "You really have like talent, and you should work in the industry and all this." And I, out of like, I mean, I've showed my stuff to so many people, and they just trashed me and like sent me like running away. But Sam, like the first guy I ever sent to, I just got super lucky, I guess. And he was really supportive. He gave me his phone number and he said, call me and I'll help you try to get some work. And so I went back home, it's just like, I think the luckiest thing in the world. And I went back home and I called him up and he just started giving me advice on like how to get in the industry. And like the first thing he told me was, you got to get out to San Diego and show your work. And, of course I didn't even know what you meant by San Diego, but it was of course the Comic-Con.
Yeah.
So I drove out there with my truck and I took my big old portfolio that wasn't the right size and I showed it around, showed it around all the editors. And I think I got some like, some little indie, because I've done a lot of little indie comic things. And back then they'd be like an anthology or something and they'd pay you like a whopping, $7 a page or something.
Yeah.
And then it would get published and then they wouldn't even pay you that.
Right.
Yep.
And I got some of that kind of stuff. But I came home and I told Sam about the whole thing. And then he said, okay, like now here's your next step. He's like, there's, how many editors at Marvel and DC? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, well, you should know that. And then he said, what do they all think of your work? And I'm, same thing. And he's like, well, you should know that. So that's your job, is to figure out what these guys think of your work. And so I started sending out packages like of samples, and I'd go to the comic shop. I'd just write down all the editors' names that I could find anywhere, and I'd start sending these out, And so like my first like real work was Neil Adams's company, Continuity. And it actually happened decently quick. I'd say probably within like a few months, I got inking work at Continuity, and that was fun. I'm not much of an inker, but and I used to get in trouble there too with like I worked there and I never talked to Neil Adams. I always would talk to his wife. That was kind of like my go-to.
Oh wow.
And then every now and then I would fuck up something, and then I would get the call from like Neil. And he would come in and he would always started by being, Jeff, you're like, really great, and we appreciate you working here and blah 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 blah. And he'd be really supportive in that, and then he would be like, but what the fuck are you doing?
Right.
Wow.
And then he would come down on me on my, because my inking was like changing and not doing what I was supposed to and stuff, and it was pretty funny. But then Continuity eventually went broke, and because they went broke like over and over and over. I didn't know it at the time, and but later, after they went broke, I saw like in the Comics Journal all these pros like yelling at Neil for not paying him and stuff. And of course they didn't pay me at the end there, but they paid me all the way up to the end. But once they went bankrupt, they didn't pay. And I guess that's kind of like was Neil Adams' thing, was to start this Continuity up and run it till it was out of money, and then he would go bankrupt. And then he's like wait a couple of years and restart it. And he actually restarted it a couple different times after I had worked there. So like that kind of got me in the industry, but it really didn't. It didn't stick, So I went back to sending samples. Eventually I got some work at Malibu, and I was working on this book called Lord Pumpkin at the time. And the Image thing starts happening, right? Because like Malibu was the original, like Liefeld was going to go through Malibu first before he did Image.
Yep.
And so when that happened, and the first Liefeld book came out, Malibu blew up, Dark Horse blew up, like all these indie companies suddenly came into existence, and Malibu could pay, and so I was working there. I was penciling Lord Pumpkin and other things, and that was good, and that was awesome. I really liked those guys. Eventually they sold that company to Marvel. I think Marvel was just trying to get rid of all these little companies that had popped up because of Image,
Yeah.
But I think the guys at Malibu really thought that, they were going to bring all the characters into like the Marvel universe. And of course they didn't.
Right. It was a kill fee, right? Catch and kill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was happening was like the computer coloring was happening. You know what I mean? And Marvel was slow to it, and Malibu was doing it, and I think that was also part of why they wanted Malibu. They wanted the coloring department, so they wouldn't have to keep trying to figure it out themselves, because Marvel was still doing the, the dots and all that stuff. They weren't really up on the slick paper and that whole thing yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's neither here nor there, but then some of the Marvel editors came over and they kind of cherry picked who they wanted out of Malibu. And so luckily I got picked, and I got to go on and work on some stuff, at Marvel. Yeah. And that's how I got into comics right there. So
That's great. Do you remember the titles that you contributed to for continuity?
yeah, continuity was one title. It was Earth 4.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
that
it
was
was,
that big crossover, the whole crossover thing.
I don't remember. I wasn't much of a fan of their books,
Right.
and all I was doing was inking, and I just, I don't know. I really had no idea what was going on. But that's the series I was on, was Earth 4, and I was there till Earth 4 ended,
Right.
and I think they even brought that book like back several times. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting stuff. It's definitely a moment in time.
So continuity also, I believe he was running advertising work too in New York City. Did you ever come across any of that? Like with he needed you on
oh
that?
no, I was,
No.
and I was
Okay.
not like, they didn't go, okay, Jeff, man, you're like amazing artist, come to continuity and do all the stuff. No,
Yeah.
I was an inker. I was strictly an inker, and
Okay.
that was
All right.
it. And of course, like Neil, he did a lot of advertising stuff, and but that was completely separate from the company. And I wasn't, later on, yeah, I talked to people and I knew people and stuff like that. I really didn't know them very well. I kind of was in fear of like his calls. and,
So yeah, the
it's
thought
very early.
the thought I was connecting was, you have this period in years ago where you're doing the Drew Struzman style of illustration, and we can get into that in a minute. But when and that would always be something that you did on your own, or where was that commercially applicable? Like, were you able to get work for that, before you went completely on your own?
Well, I didn't paint. So like this whole, time that I was in comics, like I was in comics till I was about 30. And like I'd never painted at
Oh, okay.
all except for like in high school when I was oil painting. So like I was completely
What?
separate from that. The thing with the
Oh
Drew
my
Struzan
gosh.
kind of style came along from a friend of mine, this guy Sean Tiffany. He was in comics also. We were sitting at a con together, and it was like when I first met him, and he was like, we were kind of trading back and forth, like, hey, I like this artist, you like, you know what I mean, how you do. And so Drew Struzan comes up, and we're both like big fans of his, and we start talking about him, and like Sean knows all about him, and it was really hard to find anything about Drew Struzan, before the internet came along and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he told me he had like a magazine with an article that talks about his technique and stuff, and he was telling me, that's airbrush, and I was like, no, that can't be airbrush. So anyway, after the con, me and him get to be friends, and we're always hanging out. And he shows me this article, and it was like an airbrush action magazine, and it just kind of laid out
Yep.
his technique of like tight underdrawing, and then overspraying with like a loose color, basically. So that's like the airbrush part of it, and then working over that with colored pencil. And I
Oh,
was just like, oh man, that just sounds crazy. I'd never really even thought about any kind of mixed media or anything.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I'm going to
Yeah.
try it. I'm going to just give it a shot. And I painted a piece, and it came out pretty good, and it worked just like, and I really didn't do anything more than that. I would paint sometimes. I like to go to life drawing a lot, and I would like hire different models and I would paint them, but that was completely just on my own. It wasn't attached to my comics, and I wasn't painting really anything for comics, and that was right at the end of that. So um it didn't, it really didn't ever get me any kind of work. But then like once I went out on my own, like once, because like after the bust in comics, and it kind of like, I mean, I fried my career, but I always say that fried my career, but it was like me that basically did it. And I was just working normal jobs and stuff. And then, when the internet came along, and when I eventually figured out that I could sell art on there, that's when I started drawing a lot like that, because one of the things that was hot on the internet and a way for me to kind of, get commissions and stuff and sell like kind of cheaper art with sketch cards. And that was like all movie art. And so it just kind of made sense to kind of try to paint more like, through and do that kind of stuff.
You did really well with prints though too, with like the movie kind of like screenshots for that. I'm trying to actually remember how I found you, because I don't believe it was actually your YouTube channel yet. I have a feeling it was your Etsy shop, because I was probably having set up one because they had just started up, and it was that same type of thing. You were seeing so many people with, work that either matched our skills or, greater or lower. And you were just like, okay, there's this whole marketplace out there for art.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a while to kind of realize that. And like you said, prints was like just an integral part of selling art, because sorry, my dog's like bumping my table. But it's like you really can't sell that, really high priced art, at least back then. And I was selling mainly on like eBay and stuff. So it was, everything was pretty low price, but it's like the way I could make it work was the prints. So I would, every time I'd paint a piece, I would make a print, I would put it, in my Etsy shop, I'd put it on eBay, and then those prints would just sit there and sell and sell and sell. So even though you're making like $200 or $300 on the original, I mean, you make a lot more on those prints over the next year, and that's a great business. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it still works. And
you also did pretty well with commissions too, because I think that was kind of like the your YouTube channel wasn't that was because you were your biggest viewed video is the drawing the nude. Oh, yeah. Kind of like the Playboy model thing. But you actually set that channel up for that reason, right? For your illustrations and getting commissions, then selling prints on Etsy and eBay. Is that right?
Yeah.
Am I remembering that correctly?
I did.
Right.
I did put the channel up when I was doing sketch cards. I did a few videos here and there, and I think it was like. I think because I put up a few videos here and there on different sites that weren't YouTube before that. But I remember like I was driving home one night and I heard this, whole thing about like an NPR kind of thing talking about Google buying YouTube, and they were saying, something about it, And so I thought, okay, maybe I should try YouTube, because like none of these other, video sites really did anything. And so I actually did a few sketch card videos, put them up there. I never really did anything with the channel until I was like making my living, and then, and I've told the story a million times, but I actually went back to work when my son was born. I got like all freaked out. I'm like, I can't, be an artist online and, pay all the insurance and stuff. Total bullshit. I shouldn't have gotten scared. Going back to work was a total mistake. But anyway, I went back for a little while, then I got pissed off and I left again. And that's when I really went in on the artcast. And that was like, that is like the first artcast, is me basically saying I'm quitting my job. And I think that just a reaction to that, even though I didn't have a hell of a lot of people watching me at the time, people really, they got into that. I think they wanted to see if I was going to make it or not make it. And then, probably I would imagine, if that's, because you're talking about a lot of stuff that happened a long time ago, that's probably where you got in.
It most definitely is. I'm actually, hearing your voice say artcast, that was the trigger for me, because, you were, at that beginning, obviously making a lot of mentions of quitting your job. And so that was the thing that I also wanted to do, is quit my job and do art full time. And then having known and seen you, because I was doing the same thing on eBay and Etsy, which was, you take commission work, you do, pop characters and some nudie stuff, and you hustle, that was the thing. But, the thing you were also with the artcast, I think is really kind of strategic, was vlogging. So that was an up and coming way to, obviously amplify your voice, that were, bloggers were doing. You would post blogs once a week to keep people up to date. But you were, also getting into, what was it, 30 Days of Making Comics.
Yeah.
That started coming up. And that leads to the Beserkonaut. Can we take you into that space of like, making this comic?
The 100 Days of Comics was my friend Kevin Crop, who would do like 100 Days of Comics like 100 times. Yeah, he did like one, and then he did another one, and he did another one, And then everybody started doing them. And I always sat around and just like watched them do it. And I was just like, God, that's like a great idea. But I didn't do comics anymore, because like everybody would get behind Kevin. And, if Kevin would ever have like got to the point where he got the book out, he probably would have rocked a crazy, Kickstarter or something. But anyway, I always said to myself, like, if I ever do another comic, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do my 100 Days of Comics. At the end of the 100 days, I'm gonna put the comic out. That's what I did with the Berserker Knot. I just planned it that way, and it worked. It was, like there was a real switch, and also like I think I was getting kind of burned out on the commissions and the movie art, because as much as I love it, it's like, there's parts of it I just don't like, and I also, the pressure of it, like I was under a lot of pressure because like my wife wasn't working when I did that. And, it takes a lot of art, you got to sell art all the time and constantly. And there's just some times when you're like, I know I can do it better, but I have to get it out, and I don't like that. Yeah. And, so anyway, the comic, I think, kind of came at a point when, when I could kind of afford to do it. So I was actually making quite a bit of money, and I thought, okay, I can chance it right now. I can try to make the comic, maybe make as much as, which is kind of dumb because it takes longer. I think, to actually sell art, it's just one piece of art, you sell it, you make money. To do a comic, you got to do like 24 pieces of art, then you got to get it done. That's the thing that kills a lot of people. They don't get it done. And then you got to sell it, and then you got to do it again. And, so like that is what, spurred the Beserkonaut. And it was fun. It was really cool. And I feel like a shit eel for not finishing it, but it's just, that's me, man. I'm like an artist. So.
Well, you also, I'm going to, put the link to your YouTube channel, archive wise, just going back and watching Jeff's videos. Like I said, a lot of inspiration, a lot of motivation, pure honesty about the craft and, what it takes. But the other thing too, I find kindred in spirit with you is the multimedia. So I believe there, there was things going on with the Beserkonaut and your channel and Kickstarter, and your life. But there was also this thing where the stop motion animation became like, I really want to be honest here and say, hold on, Jake. I wanted to keep this a surprise. Jake's here because Jake and I got into Flash animation 99, 2000. So this is where we're all three of us are pretty much in the same kind of like OCD to ADD zone when it comes to wanting to comic books and art and thing. But when you started talking about doing the stop motion animation, I was literally like, what? I don't know. I don't. What? Why? Where? And at first, I thought you were going to learn, right? You were going to learn how to do this. But when I started, once again, just stayed with your artcast, I was like, okay, you're going to keep doing it. And you put out that little vignette. Holy Christmas Eve, Jeff! I'm like, this guy. He needs representation. Somebody go down and get this guy and stick him in a studio in LA and call Lucas, because it's just it's mind-boggling. So, but I'll let you, Jeff, pick up from that kind of area that in your world, because then you do leave art again, right? Yeah. From that part. So I'll let you pick up there.
Okay, so the stop motion was I guess a crazy idea. I mean, that's, I think the thing is like, ever since comics, like way back when I got that first inking job, of course, like the thing you want is you want to do your own comic, you want to put your own comic out, you want to do your own story. You know what I mean? And, you kind of end up with work just because you're kind of trying to do that. Like that's the kind of samples I was sending people, but they
Yeah.
didn't go like, "Oh, Jeff, come do your own comic." They went, "No, come ink our stuff," and on and
Yep.
on, and everybody I would run into, I was always that. I remember my agent, like I used to have an agent when I did comics, and he hated that about me because every time I'd run into like a new opportunity, a new thing, they'd be like trying to talk him into putting my comic out, rather than just
Yeah.
making money and putting my head down. But anyway, that has just been something that I've had, and it just kind of evolved and went through all this kind of stuff. And at some point, I was like, maybe a movie, maybe do a movie is the thing to do. And
Comics are too small.
yeah, exactly. And I saw some guys online. That's what's great about online. You can find like anything online. I found some guys online that were doing like stop motion. Because I actually tried to like do it in like 2D animation, like with the flipping and the hand drawing and all that, and that really didn't go anywhere because that takes a lot, But I thought, well, if you make the puppets, you can just move them around. It wouldn't take as long. It's not true though.
Yeah,
But
it's funny. There's also paper animation where you're just cutting
yeah,
flat paper and moving that around. That's kind of like the South Park thing and a lot of different.
yeah,
But it has kind of like a DIY look to it. Um, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I figured it would have some kind of DIY look no matter what, because I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just was kind of like making it up, like watching a lot of other animators. There's a lot of animators online, and it's funny, like you talk about the YouTube channel, like the only time I've ever made a damn cent off that YouTube channel. I mean, I've made some money off it, but it was like before that happened, there was just something that was happening with my channel where I just kept building and building, and month after month, and I was making like more and more money. And there was a point where like I had $10,000 in the bank, and I was like, maybe maybe this is like a sign from God. I'm always thinking that. And I thought maybe this is it. Maybe I should actually, pivot. I should like try to do the stop motion. And that money is what I did it on, because I took like 6 months to do it, and I just lived off that money. And of course, at the end, there's no money, and I had to start doing art again. So, but and I also like as much as I like how it came out and stuff, it really wasn't the thing that really, it wasn't as good as what I wanted it to be and stuff. So I didn't stick with it.
yeah,
It's a roller coaster ride knowing me, man.
I mean,
it's as I say, it's very motivational. I have a playlist that I have private for my YouTube channel, and it is vignette animations. Just people doing. Like they're in Russia or Japan, always say, and you're on that. Your work is on that list, because I get to a point where I'm like, I see this moving. It just gets to a point where I just see things moving in my head, and I start thinking, oh, I should start doing some animation too. Again, I'll just brush it, but and then life grabs you by the back of the neck, and they're like, sorry, you got bills over here, you got these things, deadlines and stuff, which we know you've gone from there.
could I jump in?
The biggest question. Oh yes, please. I'm sorry, Jake.
All right,
sorry.
so
Go
we might be skipping a little bit. So the Berserker Knot is your character here. Can you bring us through the how you came up with this and what you were basing it on, and what's the elevator pitch?
Oh man, I haven't said that in a long time. So the Beserkonaut, he's like a monster hunter, and I honestly can't remember my pitch, but he's like a monster hunter, and he comes across some bodies in a museum, and then I honestly can't remember the whole the whole pitch. But he goes in there and there's like a monster in there attacking this chick, and he gets into a fight with her. And then that's sort of like the beginning, the first issue. It was like a 6-issue miniseries. And then from that, like, spins out this story. I guess I may as well kind of tell some of it, since I'll never do it. But it's where they're trying to sort of like bring back zombies to start a zombie apocalypse and like take over the city. This rich guy is trying to do that. And the guy who, the green guy there is like one of his henchmen. And then the girl kind of is the Berserker Knot's, kind of a love interest a little bit. And they sort of like unravel the mystery of what's happening and then try to stop it at the end. And of course, all hell breaks loose. And then that's the one thing I do regret, is like, I feel like I had the best ending for the whole thing, and now nobody's going to see it because I won't do it. But
well,
anyways, that's what that was.
Is this set in a contemporary setting, or is this the future, or is it post-apocalyptic, or what's the deal?
It was supposed to be like a little bit in the future.
Right. Okay.
You know what I mean? So like, I guess you could be contemporary, but like, when the cops show up, they wear a bunch of like, of course, I mean, I guess cops look like that nowadays. But I was kind of thinking like, a little bit more of a little bit into the future kind of thing. I mean, and I think that like the style and everything, I think it kind of leans on Simon Bisley a bit, and maybe Sam Kieth. I tried to do something that was, like the kind of comic I liked when I was, in my 20s, and that's the kind of comic I liked. I loved Simon Bisley back then. I loved Sam Kieth's work.
Yeah.
And so maybe I tried like a painted. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe a little Megaton Man in there.
Oh yeah. I could see some of that for sure. Yeah. And I loved like the indie comics and Sienkiewicz and those kinds of guys, and Frank Miller also.
Yeah.
And so like, I think all of that kind of, I just try to put everything, that I loved in it.
Yeah.
But I think that in some ways that kind of like messed me up, because, I think that, when you're 20, you're into like a certain thing. And then when you're 50, you might, that kind of stuff that you love, you might just kind of remember loving it. And it's not exactly what is doing it for you anymore, And I think that that's kind of what happened. Once I was drawing cartoony and doing that kind of stuff, I started to miss my actual like more realistic style and taking more time with my work. And I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't make as much money as I wanted to. I kind of did it wrong. I did the whole Indiegogo, like the way I planned it out. I learned a hell of a lot, but I didn't do it right. You know what I mean? And I didn't make as much as I needed, even though I realized if I would have went on, it probably would have actually worked, because the money kind of like what's happened with the Berserker Knot is it kept selling. It kept selling for like 2 years after the book was out,
Yeah.
And, if that would have been fueled by new books coming out, I'd probably been fine to keep going with it. So.
And what year did the first one come out?
Is it like 2018 or 19 or something?
18.
Yeah.
18.
Right.
So.
And right, so he's kind of on the back shelf right now.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever get back to it. So I know this is a comic show and stuff, but I mean, I've kind of been on and even started another comic. But, I've got this Western one that sits on my desk and isn't finished. So what I mean?
Well, now you found us out. This is the real reason. This is an intervention, Jeff, and we're gonna work with you on getting the next 5 issues and finish your comic book. Nah, man, it's so understandable. I find that no matter where people are in their creative process, spending so much time on your own and dealing with the balance between, the fantasy and the reality being really the money, that type of thing. Like I said, you're very honest. I think that was probably your biggest issue with back then, was, having so much honesty, sort of out there, and then, doing the right thing. In short, I find that I have a very similar kind of like path, in kind of timing with, Etsy and, selling eBay, all this kind of stuff, doing a comic, can't get it, blah, 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 blah. But, at the end of the day, I too, and still, you get freaked out about money, the bank account's getting low, and you just jump out and get a job.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not a big deal. It's just not. And that was one of the, like I said, I just praise you for being that way, honestly, on your show. As upsetting as it was for not seeing you every week on the podcast, your artcast vlog, it still also made me feel like it's going to be okay that if I had to jump over and grab some cash by doing this, I can always come back. Look at Jeff.
Right. Yeah,
So do you I'm sorry, no, go ahead and
well, I don't want to derail it, and I was getting ready to derail it, but I was wondering about you when I first found you guys, like recently, like I guess within the last few years of you guys doing the shows, when I came across you. And your name is Kurt Bruegel, and I was like, man, I know that name, and I kept thinking, like, where do I know it from? And I wonder if that's actually where I knew it was actually, around eBay, because I definitely paid attention. It wasn't that big of a world.
No. That's where we. Yep. There was not a lot of us, and when you just did that 30-minute, video of like, who you are and how you are and what's been going on and kind of coming back and stuff. I had put in the comments that naughty bits.
Oh man, yeah, you definitely
.com. Because, well, it was funny because everybody thinks, I mean, it was pretty trashy, but it was a direct response to, there was a period of time at eBay where, just like any other social media platform, it did it, because I did a lot of fine art nudes like you did as well. And you riff off of the Playboy kind of like sexiness, right? And it was like, you got these, like, they called them pornography strikes. And we were like, and you were watching your auctions just disappearing, and then that guy or whatever set up the naughty bids, and then things were going there well, and then of course he went derailed. So and yes, there was you. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember the other. There was a couple of us in there. Oh well, Dark One. He was also putting a lot of stuff out there. Remember Dark One?
Yeah, there was Zimmerman too, I think.
Yeah. And there was a gal.
Brandy was doing nudes back then too?
No, I'm not lumping him in there. I'm just saying, using the platform to, like Etsy and eBay, to, commissions. And I mean, I remember, I was trying to get him to, I wanted to commission him, and he was on the way out. He was like, I don't know. I just, I don't know if I'm going to do another commission and stuff. So, there's all that kind of similarity, but this leads me to my question. What are the plans ahead for you creatively?
Well, I came back in, I mean, it's funny, like, I was going to do another video and kind of like explain it, I guess, because like everybody's been asking me the same thing. And I got kind of lost for a while, because it's like I didn't really want to do commissions anymore. So I didn't want to go back to that. I didn't want to do the comic anymore, Plus the show had stopped, the show I was doing with Gibran. So it was kind of like this time of like where I was really just like, I didn't know what to do. And that's not a good place for me. I am always a guy who has a point. You know what I mean? I'm always the guy that's after something.
Yep.
I might not get it, but I'm always after something. And after a few months of that, like I almost felt like depressed and stuff. And I was like, man, I've got to like figure something out. And that's actually, I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but I thought I'll go back to stop motion, and I did some armatures and stuff. I don't really want to do that, but it kind of got me out of it. It got me thinking like, hey, you can do stuff still. You're not like fucking just, an old retired guy that's just going to die, And that brought me back to painting. And so I just kind of painted some pieces for myself, like for my wife. I painted one for my wife. And then I started thinking, well, maybe I'll try like to just paint some bigger pieces, try to get into a gallery. That's what like this is. But then, of course, like as soon as you start doing that, people start reaching out to you for work. So now I'm like doing some cards for a guy
Yep.
and stuff. So I actually think I'm just painting again. And what I realized is like I actually missed it. And I think that the reason I really started to dislike it was the pressure of, you know, having to like pay bills with it. And now I'm in a place, you know, I'm
Yeah.
older and I'm not as financially crushed as I was. My wife has a really good job, and you know,
You could
I mean, I still work,
afford.
but it's like I don't know. I'm just enjoying painting again, and so that is what I'm doing, and you know,
Yeah,
I'm liking it.
we
So,
support our habit, right? Doesn't matter if you're waitressing or doing retail or whatever. You come home and you use your time to create what you were born to do. And if
I
you're
think
go ahead.
I think it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you get old, if you stick with it, and you get older, then there's a cumulative effect where you might have a body of work where you can sell prints, or just maybe you have a royalty, or maybe maybe some money's coming in from all the stuff you did over the years, or maybe you have some old stock you're selling. There's a lot of different ways to capitalize. But
Absolutely.
the hope is that it just gets better over time, right?
Oh yeah, I think that's a lot of it that I realized too. You know, like when you kind of you stop striving, and I think that's one of the things that also kind of really got me. So I started hating the commissions and stuff. Is like you're just doing the work, and every now and then I would kind of get myself like all fired up, and I'd be like, "This is what I should do. This is like my thing. Do it as good as you can." And I do a couple really cool pieces, and then one would come along that was just like the dumbest idea ever, and you're just like I just it would kind of derail you again.
Yeah, well, you got
But
you got to take risks. No risk, no reward.
right, but I think that constantly striving, trying to get better, trying to like reach the next level was something that I lost, and I really feel it kind of coming back. And I think that it is important. It's like important to kind of like always be trying to outdo yourself.
Yeah, to challenge yourself. I mean, it's not the best maybe economically if if you're heading into some big learning curve, for some new format
Yeah,
or some new technology or whatever. But that's also like the thirst that we have to be better, and you figure like maybe you'll turn some corner and you'll really find something that'll catch on, or something that'll click for you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um,
So let's jump over to hearing Jeff's feedback on our Turbo Pit Fighter. It is the exchange. We Jake and I started this for two reasons. The Indie Creator Exchange. One was to get direct intel from the other side or the outside, or somebody that we think is in close proximity, and like hearing everybody's story really brings you closer to like trimming the fat in your own, and getting there. But also the kind of like looking at something as a technical person, like you as an artist looking at our work and seeing things that we probably can't because our noses are too close to it. So let us have it.
Are you going to do the same for me and the Berserker Knot? I don't know if I want to hear that. Um, yeah, so I got you guys' books. So here's Crom, and this is the anthology, right? This is the one you don't want to know about?
No, yeah, that's another group of people. That's actually the Crown Brotherhood, which is headed up by Jamie
Yeah.
Barrows.
I liked it.
And we're connected.
I
Yep.
liked it. I thought it was interesting, like all the different styles, and I can tell there's a bunch of different people in here, and it's very cool. But this is the one, yeah, I really actually, I mean, I'm probably gonna just do like kid gloves on you because I love it. I think it's so cool, dude. it's like I mean, it's just like the total indie comic that I was always looking for at the comic shop, especially like once I kind of came back and, was like buying new stuff and, there was like Cerebus and you'd see stuff like, just all the indie comics. And I was always looking for the weird stuff. And it's weird. You know what I mean? It's really cool. And I mean, it's like the art is phenomenal. It's like super detailed. And I love like the kind of like the style because it reminds me of a lot of like Epic Illustrated heavy metal. And
Yep.
in a weird way, I get like this Crumb vibe. And I guess it's just because this chick has all these muscles and this like nice ass and thick legs and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
But I mean, I like it, dude. I mean, it's very cool. So is it a finished book or is it like just like the beginnings of a book or what is it? That's the one part that, okay, I'll give you guys a little critique, like as far as like what actually I think that maybe you could improve on. And that is like, I don't understand it in a way. You know what I mean? I don't understand sort of the formatting. Is it like a finished comic that you guys are kickstarting or not?
Yeah, so what you're holding in your hand is just the first 12-page teaser that we're putting out
Oh, okay.
just for this purpose, just to kind of, trade and show our progress. But it will be a 28-page book, issue number 1. And then, God willing, we'll do issue number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Oh,
So
I see.
yeah, so it's just a promo. We Kurt came up with Turbo Teaser, so we just kind of use that name. But we have a real long range plan for the storyline, and we talk about that all the time on our Making Turbo Pit Fighter episodes while we're drawing. But the real gimmick or whatever of our format is that we're just making this online on air on our YouTube channel for like an hour a day, an hour a week, on Sundays, and so that's why it's going really slow. But we've been documenting the whole process. I mean, sometimes we do a little work on the side, but mostly it's just that hour a week or 2 hours a week. So that's kind of what we do. We decided to make it the making of Turbo Pit Fighter on the air, and that's our channel. That's our YouTube channel.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
And I have watched some of your shows where you guys are working on the book, so I knew you guys were working on it. I didn't realize you were just working just like one Sunday. That's kind of amazing how much work you guys have got done just doing it that way.
Well, what you're holding is, I think, a little over 2 years worth
Really?
of work.
Well, that's
every
not
Sunday.
that's not
Yeah,
fair,
so
Kurt,
it's
because
it's
that's just the inks,
huh?
and we have a whole stack of pencils for issue number 2 that he's not holding. So
So there's one.
Yeah, well, no, but I'm saying when we started the podcast, it was about 2 years worth of work that it was definitely earlier than two. That where I was like, well, let's get something together to get in other people's hands to hear, for crazy and stuff. Because the biggest thing we hear, I was just down at SPX in Bethesda yesterday, and I'm, meeting people and, talking with them and either, for the first time showing off the teaser to somebody. But most people who know us, they always say the same thing. It's like, just quit your jobs and do this full time and get these pages and books out done, which is very endearing. But one of the other things that maybe Jake and I don't talk as often as we do, but is the kind of mental health part of being a creative. And a lot of what like as I said, you and I being in a similar jumping in and out kind of like history. The biggest thing I use term wise, not only on the Turbo podcast, but my Crom the Barbarian and the anthology that I'm working on with a whole bunch, is low to no stress.
no deadline.
If you want to be a millionaire, you want to make a ton of money, and you're endorsing that, from this interview, Jeff, is that you've got to put the time in on other people's desires. they want to see this character doing this, and you're going to draw it for him, and it's going to be this bit, and that's not there's not a lot of joy that comes with that over time. You know what I mean? The money can be good, from there on and go. But if you get to a place, and like I said, I'm figuring you're most definitely the same age as us. We're getting closer to retiring, and however that looks for somebody, my personal vantage point is, I give everybody till I'm about 70 years old to kind of kick me around a little bit, but then it's just going to be like, nope, I'm doing what I'm doing. This is it. You know what I mean? Like, Social Security's paying for the rest. Like that kind of thing. Right? You see what I mean? Like so our sort of like undertone for Jake and I is this is our retirement program. Like we're establishing our retirement program because when Jake is retired from teaching in New York, we'll have all the time in the world to be working on our, maybe we'll have 2 issues done by then of Turbo Pit Fighter, and then be able to commit more time to it. So it's kind of that wish fulfillment.
So when Kurt suggested that we put out the teaser, it kind of brought a whole level of like distraction out too, because usually in split screen I'll be doing the pencils for issue number 2 and he'll be doing the inks for issue number 1. And then we got to this point where and he was like, well, we need to grow the YouTube channel too, that's part of it. So we started doing the indie creator exchange, and we started doing the flip throughs, and that really does add to your traffic and everything, but it's kind of like slows down your progress on the comic. So we still maintain that first hour. It's really just comic production, right? And then but what happened is we put out the teaser, and then we started like getting all these collaborations. So we kind of did get a little detoured, and now we're working with like I'm doing this Ken Landgraf 6-pager right here. I'm doing the lettering, and we have Alex Turbin doing an 11-pager, and so now the plan is we're going to put out the next 6 pages of Turbo in an anthology with a whole bunch of other side stories from the same post-apocalyptic world, and that's supposed to come out before the end of the year. And then we'll have another 6 pages to add to Turbo number 1. But one thing that we were kind of kicking around is, should we take just the pencils for Turbo number 2, which I have right here, and maybe put those out like as a pencil only preview, since we're just doing this kind of like this teaser stuff. And we're actually not sure. We're just kicking around ideas sometimes and spitballing, but it's interesting to talk to other people and get different vantage points. Like right here, this whole stack of work that I'm holding right here is Turbo number 2, all pencils, and this is all the way up to page 24.
Wow. Yeah.
So
I think the pencils are helping you, because it's like, if you wouldn't be doing that, then then it would really be kind of confusing, because all I would have is just what you guys are drawing on screen, and so like from an outside perspective, I think putting out something like this is actually pretty darn smart, to build up some kind of like excitement and stuff for the next one. And I don't know,
right.
An anthology is a way to to hurry it up. You know what I mean? Because it's like you don't have to do the whole book, then you just do your part and somebody else does another part. Yeah. If you got guys you can trust, that's the hard part about that part.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Well, we did this thing where we were offering free scripts, and we have a couple of free scripts written because we have this whole like prequel world that we've been working on, lots of different characters, and like explaining how the world got to go downhill little by little. And I gave a guy a script for a 6-pager, and haven't heard from him since. So that kind of stuff absolutely happens, and you have to expect it. But on the other hand, we got a 6-pager delivered from Ken Landgraf because he's a pro, And Alex Turbin, he's another indie creator that we've been working with, and he kind of jumped on board with us. What we're doing with him is interesting because it's kind of like a simulcast idea where he's taking the pages that he's making for us and he's putting it out in his comic.
Oh,
He has random access that he puts out a monthly 12 pager, and then we're going to take it and we're going to like soup it up a little bit with little like gray tones and production and stuff, and then eventually put it in our anthology too. So it's kind of like a win-win that way.
yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of
Great.
different models. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I came across you guys a while ago too. Like Kurt was doing something like this caught my attention. You were doing kind of like a promo. You were selling something. Maybe you were actually selling this thing like a promo, but I thought it was Crom actually. And then you were like
It is.
saying you were trying to make like $1,000 not on Kickstarter, and that kind of caught my attention.
Yes.
That's it.
That was
That's it.
this. Yep. This is my Crom. And the short story was me getting out of my real job. I got into doing fantasy art and commissions that way, and then the comic book stuff was the secondaries, and that was Crom as a public domain character. Right. So when it did come to getting it all done, it was all done. I have a love-hate relationship, more hate for the crowdfunding platforms because of the first thing is you have to wait. Like it's all done. So the idea is this is all print on demand through Lulu. So the moment you make your order, I send that to Lulu. Lulu prints it in 7 days and then ships it to you. Done deal. I mean, I've got my money. You got the book on its way. So I did not understand. Now, the reason I did the 100, can I sell 100 copies without Kickstarter? The theory, something I've been doing is watching indie Kickstarters, not just comic book Kickstarters, but things that were very close, I felt, to what I was doing. So I grabbed like 25 of them and captured their data, which was basically how much they were wanting to fund, how much they ended up funding, and how many people contributed, right? And I found the average to be $20 and 100 people.
Right.
So I was like, well, you know what? Let me just see if I can run a campaign, because I got to run the campaign anyways to send to Kickstarter. Screw it. I'm just going to send it. I'm going to send everybody to cromthebarbarian.com, and get them, locked into that whole community. Yeah. And, to my surprise, I sold 73 issues that way. And I already feel I'm going to do the same thing when I do the anthology, which is about 2 months away from coming out, which is going to be exciting because I'm going to run the same thing. I already know I'm going to hit 100 people because I have that already as fans on my website and on cromthebarbarian.com. Yeah. So, the marketing is to have everybody driven to you and go from there. And that's the second reason I don't like the crowdfunding platforms is now the SEO, the when somebody looks for your stuff, their website comes up. They see it. Oh, well, I can't buy it because that's the third thing I hate about it is you can't buy the goddamn thing when it's there, or you try to and it's well, screw this. Let me see what else is on Kickstarter. And then the person's immediately away, off and running. One of the other things too, just to give everybody a shout out to Crom the Barbarian and Jeff, I got some copies of the Berserker Knot from you because I also want that kind of triggering. I'm expecting that triggering mechanism on cromthebarbarian.com is somebody comes there and they're like, $20 for that. Oh, but look at this full color comic. Oh, I'll grab a copy of that. So that then becomes somewhere to keep people on, on the platform and everything. But did you have a specific question about that whole campaign?
Well, I just thought it was interesting, and I definitely questioned your sanity by not going to Kickstarter. But
yeah, well, everybody does.
So I guess you got to go in there, and you're right. It's also like you want to be a hold of your customers. And the other thing you said about crowdfunding, it is a huge pain to like sit there and you get orders, but then you don't fulfill to the end, and so it's like it's harder than just taking orders when you're selling stuff wherever, because you're not all of a sudden you have like 300 things to send out instead of like 10 today or 4 tomorrow or whatever, so.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the fourth thing I hate about crowdfunding is you are working for them. I don't care what people say. I don't care how people try to put it. You work for them. And at the end of the day, it's their platform, and you don't get any of that. There is no reoccurring anything, and I just don't have any love for it. I do not see. But what's that again, Jake?
I said it's a gatekeeper situation, but
yeah.
just like eBay and Etsy and all that. But they do, on the good side, they could bring you an audience, that you might not see. There's some people, and it all depends. You never know, what goes viral, what gets, linked or referred. So So
I just got a notification. Jeff's battery's about 20%. So we do need to close this episode before we. It actually told me that, so it's pretty cool.
But it is pretty low, I noticed. But I gotta watch over.
Yeah, well, we have to upload. We need to upload your audio and video, which can take a little bit of time after the recording session. So why don't we go ahead and, because I'm going to be just as much a fan of you. And want to get you back on here, whether you're making comics or not, Jeff, because I think, like I said, I really do believe in how much motivation and inspiration you provide just with the archives of your YouTube channel, Jeff Lafferty, and a link down below. But we always love to give our guests the shout out at the end, where to find you, what you're working on, what for people to anticipate.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would say just YouTube is probably where you can look for me, or Instagram, and I'm Jeff Lafferty on both those platforms. And as far as like a store and stuff up for sale and all that kind of stuff, I'm working on kind of like bringing all that back, but at this point it's kind of not happening. So I'd just say, if you want to hit my YouTube channel, that's a place you could follow me if you want to. But thanks so much for inviting me on the show, you guys. I mean, it was really fun, and I liked meeting you a lot.
Yeah, it was great hearing from you and learning about your history. What we always tell people is just Google Jeff Lafferty, because then it moves you up in the overall, algorithms and everything. And then people can find all the different links on there. So, Kurt will be in touch, for like a follow up whenever you have something to plug, or just, check in from time to time. And, really, thanks a lot for sending the copies of the Berserker Knot, so we could see this great style. It's great, like heavy metal style, right? Like classic airbrush painted style. A lot of work in there, clearly, and really cool meeting you. So we're gonna end this, but you stay on board, all right? So that Kurt can just do some house cleaning.
Sure, you bet.
So, folks. Yeah, no problem. So, folks, if you've enjoyed this, check out our other indie creator interviews on our YouTube channel. We also have our flip-throughs on the Comics That Influence channel. And as always, see us every Sunday live around 10 o'clock Eastern in Making Turbo Pit Fighter, which is our flagship channel. And that's it. See you guys all next Sunday. Bye, Kurt. Bye, Jeff.
See you next Sunday, Jake.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.